You probably heard about Montreal's stripper strike on May 23rd during F1 weekend. It's been making national and international headlines. As we're filming this, it hasn't happened yet, but I plan on going to the protest. The strike was organized by the Sex Work Autonomous Committee, or SWAC. Spokespeople from SWAC say they want to abolish the bar fee, where strippers have to pay their managers money to dance. SWAC is also demanding a safe, healthy working environment in clubs and massage parlors, an end to hiring and scheduling discrimination, worker status with Quebec's Labor Board to access protections like sick leave and EI, and eventually a wage. More broadly, they're demanding the decriminalization of sex work. I wrote about the working conditions of sex workers in Montreal in my latest story for The Rover. All sex workers I spoke to support decriminalization, but they are not unanimous in their support for the rest of SWAC's demands. For some, wages mean less control over shifts, breaks, and clients. Managers could be less likely to leave strippers to their own devices and more likely to have higher standards for their performances. Formalized worker status could shut out migrant workers, those with criminal records, who benefit from the independent contractor model. Some sex workers may show up to SWAC's protests even if they aren't in full support of the strike to support their fellow workers and the fight for decriminalization.
What I love about your piece is that it's clear you spent months working on this. It's clear you built trust with a lot of different sex workers, and it brings like a ton of nuance to this debate. Can you, for people who are maybe new to this or who don't think about it very often, like what are those daily working conditions like for sex workers in Montreal?
Yeah, so I have spoken to, on the record, 8 sex workers, off the record, a few more. Essentially, it's good and bad, right? Like, one of the reasons why some people flock to sex work is because maybe they're disabled, maybe they don't have status, maybe they want control over their schedule, and also it pays more than a minimum wage job. I had multiple people tell me essentially that doing sex work was a more dignified form of labor to them because at least when they were pandering to clients, they were seeing a direct benefit from that, right? So that's sort of some of the reasons why people like to do it. And also some people like being social. They like using their body in a certain way. So
there's this great scene in the story where like they're in their bras and in their heels and stuff, and they're just smoking cigarettes, kind of waiting. And it reminded me of when, when I was working construction and you're just kind of by the side of the road. You're just workers. You're workers in like a bad situation or just like a tough job. And I found that like the dignity of that makes it into the piece. And like what you're doing for this piece, which has been covered in so many different media outlets versus what you might see in the New York Times, the Gazette, wherever. Like, what do you think makes your piece different than theirs?
I think I give sex workers the space to speak because when I was writing this article, when I started writing it, it wasn't supposed to be about the strike. It was just supposed to be about sex work in general. And then we had a timely lead. It's crass to say, but that's sort of why that hits at the top. And, I put a lot of care into assuring people's anonymity because sex workers are criminalized in a certain way. It's this thing where if you sell your own sexual services, you're immune from prosecution, but everyone around sex work is criminalized. So having that sensitivity to talk about that with them in a way that made them feel comfortable, and just really taking the time, like my interviews with individual sex workers were all like an hour, sometimes more, sometimes we'd be texting before and after. In some cases, I let them see the sections that I wrote that involved their quotes so that they could see if anything was like potentially identifiable. We also did a photo shoot where I had the photographer essentially sign an NDA, and where also they got to meet each other. And then we edited the photos, obviously, for to remove identifying features, and understanding that you can't just like walk into a club and try to talk to some strippers because their manager might see that. And because of their current working conditions where they don't really have access to workers' rights because they're criminalized and because they work as independent contractors, they essentially, their managers can fire them for essentially whatever reason. So a lot of the sex workers I talked to were like, I get along well with the managers at my club, blah, blah, blah. But there is always this kind of like you could get fired for kind of whatever.
Yeah.
So my fear for this weekend, I don't know how it's going to go down, but people just sort of indiscriminately filming or taking photos of people, even people who are not participating in the protest, but just walking into their jobs. Like, some of these girls are getting stalked and have had to move clubs. Some of them could get evicted if their landlord finds out that they're a stripper. Even if stripping is technically allowed, it's just like, oh, well, I might be seen as profiting off of sex work because I don't know what you do when you get in that strip club, when you get out of it. So I'm going to now evict you. And I know that you work there because I saw that you were in this story about sex work.
Under the law, if you profit off of sex work, then you're a criminal.
If it's not your own. Yeah. If it's not your own.
Can I ask you also, like, why the importance of F1 weekend? I think to most Montrealers, like, we know right away why, but, like, why?
So there's been some assaults during F1 weekend, and
people come from all over, right?
People come from all over. Some of the girls I talked to and some of the people I talked to were like, a lot of the time the out-of-towners are like, have more money and like whatever. But during F1 weekend, they said it attracts like the worst crowd, and that's just like sort of notorious among sex workers
and everyone in the service industry that I know has like, they dread you make money on F1 weekend, but it's also a giant pain in the ass.
And then even in terms of making money, because managers charge a bar fee and they can set that bar fee to kind of whatever, obviously there's kind of a market rate, so to speak, but the later you go in the night, the higher the fee is going to be. But also if there's a special event happening like the F1 weekend, they're going to charge more money. One club charged like $110, but it basically incentivizes management to overschedule the amount of strippers that they have at the clubs. And then the strippers obviously have less clients per worker. So that was another logic there. And one of the reasons why SWAC is opposing the bar fee is because they feel it's unfair, especially in situations like these where there's some big event happening and then a bunch of extra people get scheduled. So then it makes it so that they walk away with less money, sometimes no money, sometimes in the negatives, which I've been told is happening more and more.
So people tend to flatten sex work, like sex workers are all victims, or like they make these big generalized statements about sex work. What I love about your article is you address so many different aspects of the work and also a variety of opinions on how the work should be improved and should be done. There have been sex workers who fought for wages, and this could be a good or a bad thing. Could you maybe explore that a bit?
Yeah. So unfortunately, after the piece, or the day before the piece was getting published, I became aware of this network called Pleasers on the Ground, and it's a network, not like an opposing advocacy group to SWAC. Some of them are also SWAC members, but just sort of a loose network of strippers who are like not down for waged work or the elimination of the bar fees. Some of them might be, or the formal worker status, because basically they feel like it could make them lose their autonomy. One of the reasons why, like, there's a lot of people with ADHD with like unpredictable health conditions and stuff like that who like the fact that they don't have a wage because it means they can show up kind of when they want. And one of the strippers I talked to said that the bar fee actually sort of gives them a point of leverage almost. Like, I'm sure there's a diversity of perspectives there, but they're sort of like, well, this bar fee is supposed to go towards improving, it's supposed to go towards like cleanup and like making sure our dressing rooms are like in good shape and improving the infrastructure.
So if you've paid the bar fee, you can say, look, I paid this. You have to hold up your end of the bargain. Yeah.
And basically one of the strippers in the Pleasers on the Ground network told me that there was a case where at a club, a bunch of the strippers banded together, essentially forming a temporary autonomous union. They banded together and told management, look, it's gross in here. If you don't start cleaning, like, you need to take care of the hygiene in this club, and we're not going to pay our bar fee for a month until you deal with this. And it worked. So, it's sort of like, and their argument also with the wages versus bar fees is that, like, if you're doing wages, then you certainly won't be getting the full cost of dances or tips. It'll be like kind of wages plus commissions model is what it sounds like to me. And they're like, I'd rather just pay a fixed amount, even if it's obviously a little bit variable, but not in the same way as a percentage. And then my manager doesn't care if I like go take a break for 2 hours, or if I am having... Because
you've already given them their money.
Yeah, or like if I show up and really half-ass it on the pool tonight, they're like, well, whatever, that's on you. You're the one not making tips, not me.
Yeah.
So they're kind of worried that if there's like a wage plus commission thing, then suddenly management will have a vested interest in how much tips, more so than just like, oh, they're bringing clients in. Like, they're like, no, if you don't do XYZ. So they're worried that it could affect their autonomy. And that's sort of the concern with the wage model. And like strippers used to get paid wages and used to have access to some worker benefits back in like pre-1990s. I think it was in the 1990s where they stopped doing that. I couldn't find an exact
It's not
date.
super well documented.
It's not well documented.
Yeah.
But like the thing is that like I just explained, it's tricky to see how it would go down. And I spoke to a stripper who's worked in Montreal and in San Francisco, where they've had wages since I think 2019. And the perk of having the wages and worker status was that when the pandemic hit, they got workers, they got EI, essentially.
You get compensated for,
They got
these protections.
Yeah, they got some protections. But now she told me that like strippers are making way less money. More of them are turning to full service sex work because the hourly rate has ended up being lower, and like there's a lot more marginalized people doing sex work. So yeah, that's kind of like it sounds good to some people in theory, but then in practice, formalizing the work and getting a wage seems there's a lot of dissent among sex workers. However, that's not to say that they're not down with like potentially forming autonomous unions where each club kind of like has a sort of less formal union, or like advocating for, some of them might be pro eliminating the bar fee, I'm not too sure, or like just improving hygiene and security, because like security in clubs right now, it's very variable if security is going to actually look out for the girls and the dancers, or if
they're kind of looking out for the clients.
They're more looking out for the club than they want to protect the club. And part of that logic is because the work is criminalized, right? Yeah. And they don't want the club to get in trouble. Yeah. And the same thing kind of goes for the way that police deal with strippers and sex workers. They're very dismissive. They're very patronizing. They will even say stuff like if in the rare occasion where a sex worker would try to report an assault, which I have a story in my article about that, like literally the cops have told them, well, you were asking for it, kind of thing. Yeah. Yeah. So the fact that it's criminalized and all the legislation is in this language of victimization and trafficking and blah, 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 you're either a victim or a criminal, it makes it so it's really hard for them to access their workers' rights. So that's kind of why sex workers, every single sex worker I spoke to was like, no, we want decriminalization. Even though not all sex workers might be on board with wages and worker status, I think that their cause now is getting a lot of media attention, which they don't often get. And you see the way that the public perceives sex workers in like the comment sections of some of these mainstream media articles. It's pretty rough in there. They're very dehumanizing. Yeah. But what was also cool was under the video I posted was I got sex workers, strippers commenting.
Yeah, I saw there was like a discussion between you and a group, and it's like, oh, we'll meet on Tuesday.
Yeah, they're discussing amongst each other about kind of the pros and cons. So bringing that sort of dialogue into mainstream, even if the strike doesn't go perfectly or whatever, or there's some infighting that needs to be worked out or some disagreements that need to be worked out, the sex workers have been sort of under, in the shadows for a very long time. And seeing media kind of show up and write about sex workers going on strike as actual workers is an interesting development.
It's like a quantum leap. Like,
Yeah,
it really
yeah,
is.
yeah.
When I see the New York Times or the Athletic, which is owned by the New York Times, reporting on this and calling it a strike and referring to labor rights,
Yeah.
it's not perfect. It's not a great piece of journalism, but I think that that's part of what you're doing. That's part of what we're trying to do with the Rover, and it's my favorite thing that we've run in a very long time. It's one of the many, many, many reasons I love when you write with us. And, if you haven't already, you should check it out on the website.
Thank you.
therover.ca.